Are you looking for motivated seller leads that actually turn into real deals? Whether it's wholesaling, flipping, or rentals, it all starts with understanding the different types of distressed sellers and knowing how to genuinely help them. Hey, I'm Ryan Zomorodi, co-founder and COO of Real Estate Skills. In this video, we're breaking down the main types of distressed sellers that investors and agents run into, how to find them, and how to turn tough situations into ethical win-win opportunities. From foreclosures and tax lien properties to probate and bank-owned homes, you'll learn how to work with these distressed sellers strategically and compassionately while building a stronger, more profitable business. And to help me unpack this topic, I sat down with my friend Henish Pulickal, a real estate pro with nearly 2 decades of flipping experience and the founder of one of San Diego's top construction and investment firms. Together, we'll walk you through proven strategies to serve distressed sellers the right way and grow your real estate business in the process. Let's get into it. Let's just kind of dive into pre-foreclosures and what it really means, kind of the process that homeowners are looking at, and ultimately how to find these types of deals, right? We have a lot of investors listening, people who are looking for deals. So, what is a pre-foreclosure, and how do sellers ultimately end up this way?
Yep, absolutely. So it varies from state to state in terms of what the foreclosure laws are, and it also depends on if it's owner-occupied versus an investor property. But basically for owner-occupied, if you're 120 days late on your mortgage, basically, what's that, 4 months late in your mortgage, the mortgage company can refer it to a trustee. It's usually a third-party law firm saying, hey, this person's late 4 months. We need to file an NOD, which gets filed with the public records, and it's now publicly available. And that tells the seller with the post on their front door or delivered personally saying, hey, your house is in default. You have to pay X amount to cure that default. If you don't, we're going to pursue a sale of your property.
Yep.
Right. So typically about 30 days after the NOD is filed, if the homeowner doesn't call in and try to fix this or set up a plan or pay it off, they're getting an NTS, which is the notice of trustee sale, which typically from 21 to 30 days after that sets an auction date at a courthouse saying at 10:30 on this date, this house is getting sold, and that's that, right? So there's ways to postpone that as well, but that's basically the foreclosure process. So if by that point of the notice of the auction date, you don't fix this or have the bank postpone it because you're trying to get a modification or a reinstatement or a grant or something that you can do or a second lien to fix this, they're going to be selling that house. And so then it goes to the highest bidder. If no one bids, it goes back to the bank, and then they eventually try to get those people out and sell the house and recoup their losses as well. If there's anything left over, they might pass that back to the seller.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because in the real estate industry, especially a lot of new investors, they hear pre-foreclosure, foreclosure, REO, auction, and it's all kind of the same thing. So I think it's really important just to highlight that there are different phases in the entire process. And, missing your mortgage payment is just the beginning. So there's really no way for us as investors, the public, to know if you've missed a mortgage payment. It's in this case, 120 days after that first delinquency where there's a notice of default filed. So that's when it officially becomes a pre-foreclosure. Before that, it's like a pre-foreclosure. It's really nothing yet.
Yes.
So once that NOD is filed, then now it's officially a pre-foreclosure lead. And so since it's filed publicly, that's how we can generate those leads as investors, as agents, anyone who's interested in finding pre-foreclosures. How does one go about finding NOD filings and really finding those pre-foreclosure leads?
Yeah, absolutely. There's various systems that do that. The one I've used for a dozen years is Property Radar, and that I'm able to create lists within San Diego, where we live here, to find all those properties and then delineate them by zip code or by how much equity they've got or their values or their neighborhoods, and then have my door knockers go out and target them to schedule appointments for me to go meet with those people. How that's useful. And it's a big difference to have pre-foreclosure versus an REO or a bank-owned property, because with the pre-foreclosure, I'm still working with the homeowner. They're still an owner, and they can still decide what happens to the property. By the time it's an REO or a foreclosed property, now you have to deal with the bank, who's typically hired an agent to list it, who's typically reporting to an asset manager at the bank that has to make decisions on the sale. And you might not be able to make as favorable as a deal because you're not working directly. You got a middleman, and they're trying to pump up the price as much as possible, create multiple offer situations. So I think you can get a better win-win deal if you can negotiate with the seller directly.
Absolutely. And it's better for the homeowner too. It's better for the seller.
It varies.
Yeah.
So, one of the distressed owners that I'm working with right now, I offered her a price and she thought it was too low. And now we're jumping through hoops, including home showings and multiple repeat showings and having people come through and disturb her and her dogs and her tenants that she's got living with her to be able to get a higher price. So yeah, there's fast and easy, which is often less money, or there's more difficult and cumbersome, which could net more, maybe, as long as everything works out. But it's a lot more work for me as the listing agent on that one and for the seller to accommodate all the people that need to come through and assess what they can afford to pay for the property.
Absolutely. Yeah. The convenience, of a quick cash offer is trade-off versus putting in more work to get a higher price. But when it comes to buying and, this distressed seller selling their property during that pre-foreclosure period, would you say it's better for them to sell then versus once it's taken back by the property, then they've basically lost the home, right? And it can be pretty catastrophic to their credit and, to their financial situation and ability to borrow in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, already their credit's shot for a long time, but having a foreclosure on your record prevents you from buying anything for at least 7 years. Just having bad credit, you could fix that in 1 or 2 or 3 years and be back on the horse and buy another property. Getting it done before the bank forecloses is way better. If the bank forecloses on the property, if it goes to third party and sells for more than the liens, then the bank is technically supposed to give that overage to the seller, assuming they can find them.
Yeah.
Right. If they've moved out from that house and don't have a forwarding address, I don't know how hard the bank is trying to find those people, and this probably becomes unclaimed property. And if they never claim it, then it might become state property. Right. So eventually, so I'm assuming a huge chunk of people lose their money because there's still foreclosure sales happening. So better to have it done now, and then you're getting their money,
right,
and you're getting paid.
Yeah. So let's talk for a second about short sales, because this is kind of right in line with this part of the process where, an owner is in pre-foreclosure. However, their property is worth less than what they owe on it. And I think, there's been a period where there really haven't been a lot of short sales. There were a ton, 10, 15 years ago during the last financial crisis. And I would say the past couple of years, there's probably been more short sales, with 2022, there's a little bit of a bubble and, people were bidding properties up, and it kind of cooled off a little bit. So, I mean, how do short sales kind of play into things? I mean, what is a short sale, and ultimately, how does that differ from a traditional sale?
Yeah, short sale is when the liens against the property are more than the value of the property, right? And so there's not any equity to give to the homeowner because the property values have decreased or their interest is padded on so much onto their loan that it's now exceeded the value of the home. Especially if there's deferred maintenance, around here, you could have a house that could be worth $900,000, but maybe in its current condition is only worth $700,000, right? And if they had a loan for $650,000 and they haven't paid for a few months, that could exceed $700,000 real quick. And by the time you sell that house at $700,000, you pay commissions, which are required, and any closing costs, they might only net $650,000 again. And so now the bank is $50,000 short, and that's effectively a short sale, right? In those cases, oftentimes we can negotiate a relocation expense for the seller, sometimes $3,000 to $5,000 to get them out in a few weeks of time. And then they're clear on their property and they've eliminated this debt. And depending on if it was a purchase loan or a cash out refi, they may or may not have a judgment against them for the amount of money that they've lost for the bank.
So as far as timeline, short sales, from my experience, are notoriously, they take a long time to close. So what's different about this process than just buying a home on the MLS or from a traditional seller in your experience?
Yeah, it varies on how efficient the bank is at processing these things, because there's someone working at the bank that is doing the numbers and crunching the numbers. And they're getting a net sheet from the escrow company. It says how much they're going to have left over to pay off their mortgage. And then whatever that delta is, they need to approve it with management at that mortgage company to say, hey, we're going to be losing $50,000, $100,000, $250,000 on this loan. Will you sign off on it so we can remove this asset? And so that can take some time. I actually used to do that job during that last recession. So for 2 years, 07 to 09, I ran the bank's foreclosed homes REO department and I had approval myself as the manager of the department to write off losses up to $150,000. So if
Wow.
we had a $450,000 loan that we sold for $300,000, I had to write off $150,000, I could sign off on it. But anything over that would have to go to the director of operations for the company, and you have to sign off on the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 losses that we incurred as well on those portfolios. So that process in the past, when they were inter-officing files between offices and having to review the BPOs, the broker price opinions, to say, is this a fair value we're getting, to confirm that they're doing the best for the investors that own these mortgages as a servicing company, can take some time. When we went more digital, it happened a lot faster when we were kind of getting into normal timelines, but there might be still some banks that are having a very slow process and a slow approval process, because it might have to go all the way up to the president of the company to sign off, and this probably isn't a priority for him to run through immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably the last thing that the president of a bank wants to do, just write off these huge losses.
Correct.
So that's really fascinating. Yeah, you were the individual at the bank who ultimately would approve of the offers from investors, right? So
Correct.
Ultimately, you calculate the net sheet, see how much you're ultimately going to, the bank is going to lose on that loan. And so you would have to take all things considered. I mean, what was kind of like your process? I'm just genuinely curious. Like, would you be looking at multiple offers? You'd be hiring an agent, or the agents would be coming to you, right? And then you'd be
right. So, to verify the values, you'd get a BPO from the listing agent. And then typically we would also have a BPO from a third-party independent company to make sure we're in line, so they're making sense, right? If the agent says it's worth 400 and the BPO, third party, says it's worth 600, well, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
So now we can kind of dig into it and figure out how we're so off on values. If they're close enough, then we're making that judgment. Okay, one person says 400, the other one says 420. All right, it's probably in that range. We got an offer at 390, 395, 410. That works, And so it was basically like that. It was a lot of times just very subjective. There wasn't like a very objective measures. We'd have to look at it, make a case-by-case decision for each property.
Yeah, I mean, banks aren't really in the business of buying and selling properties. They're in the business of lending. Correct. So you as an individual, would you say you're the asset manager for the bank? Ultimately, you guys are hiring a listing agent. You're also doing a third-party BPO, or like a broker price opinion, like an appraisal, to verify the listing agent's opinion of value. So you're ultimately listing that property. Back in the day, you're listing the property in the MLS. There were lots of these short sales in the market back then. And then investors, home buyers are coming in, making offers, and then ultimately putting the deal together. So there's a couple extra layers with the short sale, but ultimately it needs that bank approval, which was you. So once it's approved, then ultimately you guys issue an approval letter of some sort with some additional terms, to kind of make sense of that offer. If you kind of counter offered in some way and ultimately come to a deal. Is that?
Yeah, basically like that. It'll basically say a letter from the bank says, okay, we approve this deal. The net cannot be less than this number that we've agreed to, with a little bit of pad, because we know costs come up. And then they've got to, finish the sale with those numbers, right?
Yeah.
They can't add on expenses or add on extra concessions or credits because the buyer wants something. We've agreed to that price, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. So as far as short sales go, how would you find a short sale? If I'm an investor looking to buy a short sale,
Yep.
Where would I be looking?
Yeah, I'm still using that system. I'm using Property Radar, and you can use that system and any others to determine it based on the automated value models that are built into these systems, what the property is worth, and then they'll have an assessment of what those liens are and if there's a delta. So you can type in properties with negative equity and target those as well. Right, so it'd be easy enough to find. I haven't done that search in a while myself, but I'm sure there are some properties that'll pop up with liens that are higher than their automated value, and those are good ways to find short sales and have those conversations. Hey, say you're underwater, so it makes sense to get rid of this thing and move on to the next property.
Yeah. So in this case, this is even before the property owner's looking to sell. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and they might be aware too, right? I mean, so depending on the situation, the homeowner might be aware when their mortgage statement comes through and it says it's worth X and their property is worth less than X. They're like, oh, this is weird. Why would I keep paying this mortgage on a house that's not as worth as much as the mortgage is, right? And so ideally they would know, but if they're a distressed seller, a lot of times they're so stressed they want to just avoid that conversation and the truth of what's happening, and they'll kind of be in denial, right? right? The denial is a big part of this with distressed sellers.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So, you proactively reaching out to these sellers, they're clearly financially distressed, their property's underwater, and you're having this conversation, and then ultimately, if they're on board, you'd have to approach the bank and propose a short sale in this scenario, right?
Yeah, if that happens, I mean, I haven't seen too many, but I've done some recently, especially with reverse mortgages, because those reverses can add up with them being floating rates. And so those can add up. And if there's been deferred maintenance, well, that property value's decreased quite a bit, especially if they got the reverse mortgage when values were super high in San Diego, right? Versus today where they've kind of flattened out a little bit. You could see some of those where, that reverse mortgage balance has gone up enough to trigger a short sale situation, right? So I have done short sales on reverse mortgages, and they get it. The bank looks at the value and says, yeah, I get it. We show them some pictures of the house. It's trashed. They're like, okay, we get it. It's not going to be worth the same as the comp down the street, right? So they know that, and they'll make those adjustments accordingly.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I've seen, or at least in years past, seen quite a few short sales on the MLS listed. So in that scenario, owner's already ready to sell. They've made that realization. They've moved on. Maybe it's a listing agent who's reached out and kind of had that similar conversation, but ultimately ended up on the MLS, right? So is that kind of a different mindset, would you say, or a different conversation in pursuing those leads, or is it kind of just similar process since they've already decided to sell?
It's tough, unless a buyer's coming in at market value per the bank's perception based on their BPOs. Their bank is typically going to force it to be on the market and want to see at least a 7-10 day marketing window where it was available to be seen and shown to the public, so they could get in the highest offer possible, because they're trying to limit their losses.
Right.
So yeah, it's rare to do a fully off-market short sale situation.
Okay, so even when you're pursuing these sellers off market, maybe you're the first one to contact them, you have a great conversation, they're open to it, the bank will still put it on the market for that 7-day marketing period.
Potentially not, depending on when it was.
Yeah.
In the past, when I was doing a lot more of those, the 10 years ago, 7, 8, 10 years ago, we had more short sale deals. Sometimes we could send in the offer right off the bat, and if it was in line with the bank's values, they might just approve it. And so that could work too. So, it's worth the shot. But if they say, hey, no, we need to see it on the market, depending on how their processes are, they may or may not require it.
Right. So we talked about pre-foreclosures, talked about short sales. Let's talk about foreclosures, right? This is after, after this period where the seller has the opportunity to actually sell it as the owner, but now it's been repossessed by the bank. So, I mean, what is a foreclosure, and how is that different from any other type of sale?
Yeah, foreclosure is when that person hasn't paid their mortgage, it sells at the auction, and if it doesn't sell to a third-party investor and it reverts back to the bank, then that's what's considered a foreclosed REO property, right? Otherwise, if another investor buys it, they don't consider it a foreclosed property, right? They just consider it, well, now it's my investment property, right? And so that's the foreclosed properties. No one bid high enough to meet the minimum bid for the bank, and so now the bank owns it, and now they're going to have to work to get the homeowner and any or tenants out, cash for keys or eviction, and then they might fix it up a little bit and put it back on the market to try to sell it, pay off as much of their lien as they can.
So it's not really ever a foreclosure until it gets to this point, So I think kind of my earlier point was there's, a lot of people look at pre-foreclosures as, hey, we're buying a foreclosure, but that's pretty much a traditional sale until you get to the point where it doesn't sell at auction, and then ultimately the bank takes it back. So how do you find foreclosures, and ultimately how do you pursue them to buy as an investor, or to flip houses, or really for any other?
Yeah, typically you might have a disclosure or a box checked on the MLS when it says like an REO disclosure or an REO notice. And so you might have some paperwork to sign that says, hey, this is a bank seller. They don't know anything about the property. They've never lived there. We don't know the condition. So you have to agree that, that there's no lack of disclosure, right? I didn't tell you about the leaky sink because I didn't know about it because I'm the bank, right? And so so it'll typically designate that on most MLS systems where it says it's an REO property, delineates it's a bank owned. You don't really know, the seller doesn't really know what they're selling, is what that's going to state.
Yeah, and typically those types of sellers are exempt from filling out certain disclosures.
Correct.
A typical transfer disclosure statement here in California, and I assume similar in other states.
Correct.
So, because like you said, they've never lived in the property, all they have done is lend upon the property. Maybe they did an appraisal, but
that could be years old.
Yeah.
Right. And so that doesn't really tell you the condition of the home, right, except for a few pictures. So
Yeah.
even that appraiser isn't inspecting the furnace or the roof or anything, right? So there could still be significant problems with it that the seller, as the bank, wouldn't know about.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, foreclosures are good, but then now it's still a competitive market on the MLS, right? You're still trying to beat out other investors to buy that property.
Right. Just because it's a foreclosure, just because the bank is selling it, doesn't mean it's a good deal automatically.
Right. Correct. Yeah. Not automatically, because they're trying to push the value and try to recoup as much of their loss as they can. Right. And if they had a lower loan amount, they still want to try to sell it at market value. They're kind of obligated to do that, because then they have to owe the remaining proceeds to that prior seller.
So how do you go about finding foreclosures?
Yeah. I mean, if it's a foreclosed property, it's typically going to be listed. Right. And so back in the day when every bank had thousands of them, there was a lot of foreclosed listings, So nowadays it's a little less. I want to say there's probably about 40 or so foreclosed homes in San Diego. I haven't done an analysis of how many of those are going to third-party investors versus how many are going back to the bank. For the most part, they're probably getting sold to third parties, what it looks like when I looked last, because that lien amount is much lower than the value of the property. So investors can come in, offer amount at the auction that makes sense, and still fix it up and sell it and make some profit. For the most part. So it's designated on your MLS when it's a REO property. Is the best way to find it. Otherwise, looking in these systems like Property Radar to find pre-foreclosure, then you have to talk to the seller. You can't talk to the bank about a pre-foreclosure property,
Right?
Because they're not in control of that asset.
Got it. So if it becomes a foreclosed property, MLS is probably the place to go to find those deals. But if it's before, then sometimes they're on the MLS, but a lot of times you'd have to reach out directly to the seller, get in front of them, educate them on their options, and ultimately figure out what the best route is for them.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the way I go about it. Versus other people will try to strong arm the seller into it or persuade them to sign a sales agreement.
Yeah, I appreciate guys like you, really leading an example, coming in, really trying to help, and I think that's what the best real estate professionals are empowered to do. We have to come in with being educated on the laws, on the legal processes, and just the real estate market in general too. So there's a lot of disciplines that come together to truly be able to help people and educate them so that they understand what's going on, but then ultimately help them take those next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important, one, just as a human, to treat other humans fairly. And then two, I don't want someone to get $100,000 in cash from me after I buy their house, and their cousin says, "Hey, this looks like you got a bad deal. Let's talk to a lawyer." And I want to have a lawyer be able to review it and say, "Well, he did everything right, did it fair." And at the end of the day, most of these projects that I do end up making $70,000 or $80,000, which on a $700,000 or $800,000 project isn't a huge amount of profit. It's like 10% on the risk that I could have lost that much as well. So yeah, definitely not gouging people and just trying to make it transparent, right? Hey, I need to buy your house for X. I need to invest Y into it, and hopefully I make Z profit if everything goes perfect.
Yeah.
Right? And then with that kind of logic, a lot of homeowners will work with me on that. And so the last couple that I worked with, typically they're giving me hugs at the end of the transaction. I'm so glad it worked this way. I was stressed, and it made it so much better. And thank you for doing what you said. You told me you'd get me $150,000. I did. That was incredible. I thought you would trick me on that, and I was worried about that. But you did what you said you would do. So it works out, and it just encourages me and remotivates me to keep offering those services and helping as many people as I can with that. Yeah,
no, that's amazing. So how do you buy a foreclosure? There's you're working with the bank, obviously. It's not a traditional seller, right? You're not working with the homeowner. So, I mean, what are the steps that you would go about if you're advising a new home buyer to pursue a foreclosure, if they're looking for a deal and they found one that's owned by a bank, it's an REO property. I mean, what are the steps to even buy a foreclosure?
You can't really buy it until it's listed. For 99% of the time, they're going to list that property and then sell it on the open market. So you'll see that REO advisory and that'll designate that it's a REO property, right? So we can go into our MLSs right now and search for active properties in San Diego that are REO, and it'll pop up however many there are. Maybe there's 2 or 3 or 5, who knows? And then you could try to pursue those, knowing that there's going to be some deferred maintenance and it's still in the market and there's other eyes looking at it. But, and the example I mentioned earlier before we were recording, if it's in move-in reasonable condition with a functional kitchen and bathrooms and a furnace and no holes in the walls, you can get financing on it. And so I'm seeing eager homeowners in San Diego willing to pay a premium to have a move-in ready house, even if it needs some paint and carpet and a lot of elbow grease to clean, just so they can achieve the goal of home ownership in San Diego.
Yeah, absolutely. I've looked at other websites. One of the first deals, I think it was the third property I ever bought, was a foreclosure. It was a Fannie Mae home path foreclosure that was it was listed on the MLS, but it was also listed on Home Path, which is Fannie Mae's kind of foreclosed listing website.
Yep.
And so there are a couple other kind of smaller sites, and I have looked recently, and there's not a ton of inventory on those websites. So I think, to your point, I think overall, homeowners are pretty equity rich. We've had a great run up the past 10 years or so, and so there's less of that type of distress. Although of course it does happen, and yet to your point, investors are able to buy them at the auction or even before, so they don't. A lot of them aren't even getting to that point where they are taken back by the banks.
Correct. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so they're not going to the banks, and you're not going to see as many of those as we did in 2008-9.
All right, so really quick, everyone, if you want to analyze the types of deals we've been talking about with confidence, be sure to download our free deal calculator at realestateskills.com/calculator, and I'll leave a link in the description. It's the same tool we've been using for 13 years to analyze wholesale, fix and flip, and rental deals. Plus, if you want to learn how to wholesale, flip houses, and invest in rentals without spending a dime on marketing, then check out our free on-demand training at realestateskills.com/watch. Remember, both of them are 100% free, and you can grab them down below right now. Now let's get back to the video. Awesome. So what other types of distressed sellers have you kind of worked with or you want to chat about? I know there's sellers going through divorce, there's bankruptcies. I know you were mentioning a bankruptcy issue, a couple times, during the times that we've chat. There's, probate, inherited properties. There's absentee owners, right? Just landlords who don't live at the properties. So,
yeah, all of those are great examples. I mean, those are other types of distressed owners. Yeah, like I said, I mentioned earlier, I'm working with another lady that unfortunately hit someone with their car and got in a lawsuit and now owes that defendant a good chunk of money. So once that gets finalized with the attorneys, she's going to be forced to sell one of the properties because the settlement's $700,000+, and she's got some properties that have that kind of equity.
Wow.
So she'll need to sell it, use that money to pay off her judgment. And so that not ideal. She doesn't want to, but if you hurt someone and the courts decided that you owe them some money, that's what's going to happen. So that's an interesting case there. Otherwise, I've had code compliance issues where code compliance is coming through and it's overgrown or it's uninhabitable, and so code compliance can force a sale as well, saying, hey, the city is going to put a liens on this property and eventually enforce those liens if something's not done. And so typically, they might reach out to extended family or someone and try to get involved because it's usually some kind of distressed homeowner that's there that's typically elderly and kind of left alone. I've done a house like that a little while ago where the house is totally overgrown. There's literally trees growing through the house.
Oh my gosh.
And the whole yard was covered in overgrown vegetation and trees and plants. Took us 6 dumpsters just to get rid of the plants. It was a big size lot, maybe 10,000 square feet, but it was still a huge amount of overgrowth. And so much water damage had happened that giant beams were cracked and broken throughout this house, giant beams. And so, the city was going to foreclose on it for the code violation liens. And the family came in and got involved, took grandma on a one-way vacation somewhere, not sure where, and got her out of the house and sold the house. And so I was able to buy that one. And that was one of my better flips. Bought a house in Mount Soledad for 1.1, put in about $400,000 in repairs. but it ended up selling for $2 million. So that worked out nicely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 1.1 for Mount Soledad, very treasured area of San Diego. So yeah, it sounds like a fantastic deal, but a lot of issues with the property.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, honestly, you couldn't even see the property. I remember telling my project manager for construction to bring a machete. And we got back there. He's like, we can't even get through the backyard. I'm like, well, where's the machete? He said, I thought you were joking. It's like, I'm not joking.
Sounds like you might need a chainsaw for that.
For sure, yeah,
right?
for sure. There's a lot of vines and stuff. It wasn't anything too thick. I think a machete could have done it. But the point was taken that it was a huge amount of cleanup.
Oh, wow.
And we couldn't even see that there was a pool back there because trees had grown through the pool as well.
Oh, my goodness.
And so we had to re-pour a pool, and that's why that rehab was kind of expensive.
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine. So when it comes to distressed sellers that have code compliance issues or liens for these kind of violations, I mean, are these also just listed on the MLS or?
Yeah, you could search for them up. I think on city websites. I don't think you can find them on the MLS unless it's listed, but it's not going to say, hey, there's code compliance violations on here. I did one last year where it was a hoarder situation, and he was not. Sometimes hoarders are discreet and just have it in their house and in the backyard. But this one was so over the top, it was in the front yard too. So all the way to the sidewalk, 7-8 feet tall, was piles of boxes and junk and under tarps, trying to keep the rain off of it, of all his valuable possessions in the front yard as well. So multiple code violations against it. They actually cleaned out his house a while ago and put lien on it for that cleanup, which was $15,000 or $20,000 to need accrued that much more stuff again in the prior few years. And the neighbors were all complaining that rats were coming out of his house because there was, who knows, it wasn't cleaning up properly and they were just living there and breeding. And so, he was about to lose his house for code compliance and for not paying his mortgage. And I was able to get involved, stop all those, get him some cash and sell the house and make some money on it. And it was, and that one worked out well. But, it was incredible because he got some equity out of it, and of it, he spent over $30,000 relocating his valuable possessions from his house to storage lockers in San Diego so he can keep all his valuables together.
Wow. Yeah, values in the eye of the beholder.
Yes, yes.
Sure, they're quite valuable belongings.
Yeah, I remember his specific quote was, some people would say that I'm a hoarder, but I'm not because all of this is valuable stuff.
My gosh.
So I was like, okay.
Sure, a lot of hoarders also share that sentiment about their
they all
stuff.
Think that. Yeah, even the one I'm dealing with right now, she's like, no, she was worried that the potential home buyers would steal her things.
Wow. Yeah. A little bit of paranoia mixed in with the hoarding.
Correct. And I was like, I promise you no one wants your dirty stuff.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it's very gross, in this house.
Yeah. That's interesting. So you mentioned these code violations, they're public information, right? They're noticed publicly. You can look on the city websites. That particular sale you were talking about was also in pre-foreclosure. So, of course, there's the NOD as well. So, I mean, are there websites or software, maybe Property Radar also serves this function for code compliance notices?
You're going to have to edit this part out. I honestly don't know that thing.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that you can in the San Diego website, like a seller or something, look up code compliance issues. I personally have never done that. I just target the pre-foreclosures exclusively. So sometimes I'll find it on there when I run a prelim or something like that, and there's a recorded code compliance lien or a City of San Diego lien on there. And so, maybe that's the solution. Maybe one of your options is to check with your title person and have them run an area and say, hey, here's some zip codes I'm interested. Could you find any properties that have code compliance issues recorded against title? And that could probably get you some of the more serious offenders versus the minor ones.
Yeah, if it's a serious issue, then it's probably recorded on title. So if the seller goes to sell, like, because I've had this come up in properties that I've pursued, you go to title, they run a title search, they'll say, hey, there's $20,000 of
liens.
City fees, city liens.
Yeah.
Like, you have to clear that. So it is going to affect title. They can't close the sale until they settle that amount.
Yeah.
So having a good title officer, I'm sure is important when you're trying to run title and understand really what's going on with the property.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a great source to find that for the more serious code compliance issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You mentioned probate and trust sales and stuff like that. I mean, those are less distressed, even though many times the houses are dated condition. You still have a lawyer involved. You still have a probate referee involved. You typically have an appraiser involved, and you can't sell that house for less than 90% of the appraised value. So that can create some challenges. We've got a listing right now. It's a huge house in Point Loma in a very nice neighborhood, but it's got an odd layout, and the house is in very dated condition, even though it's in somewhat maintained. But the appraiser came in kind of high, and it's been almost 2 months in the market, and no one's even touching it at that price. And so it's going to take $500,000 or $600,000 to fix this house up to modern conditions, because it's almost a 4,000 square foot house. And you can't put in builder grade finishes or entry level finishes in a house that's in a neighborhood of $3 million houses.
Right.
That can be challenging. So then plus there's 15 beneficiaries, right? This family has it in a setup where 15 different family members have to chop up this pie of the sale of this house, and everyone thinks that their house is worth the most, regardless of where they live or how well they know the San Diego market. So they can be challenging in that sense. Can there be opportunities? Absolutely, because a lot of times they're dated properties and they might be maintained, but maybe grandma and grandpa remodeled it when they're 40 and they passed away when they're 85, and so it's been 45 years since they've done anything to the house. And so opportunities there. You just have to run your numbers to make sure that it works for you as an investment. In this case, our only best hope for that property is that a homeowner that wants to live in that area says, great, I can buy this property for about $2 million, put in $500,000-$600,000, and it'll be worth $3 million. That's not enough profit for a flipper, because that delta is made up in the holding costs in terms of the interest that you'd have to pay your lenders and stuff like that. But for a homeowner, maybe it gives them an opportunity to customize their dream home in a very desirable area. Right. So that's kind of the best hope there. So tricky situations. The probate sales, not a great option for investor buyers, but it can work. I've done some and broke even on a couple, and so it's hard to get them at the right price and put in enough to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, for those of our viewers who don't know, what is probate and how is it related to real estate investing? Yeah,
and this is a easy option for a lot of realtors to pick up some additional business. Is so many people don't title their property into a trust, right? They might have it in their name personally, and if you have a surviving spouse, great, it goes to your surviving spouse. But if you don't, then even to go to your kids, it has to go through probate. Which is a legal process which has to notice every single family member, make sure no one else has claims to ownership. You have to pay an attorney tens of thousands of dollars based on the value of your estate to go through this probate. And ultimately, in many, many cases, a bunch of family members end up fighting each other and having irreparable damage to those relationships. And eventually the probate attorney will have to sell this property off or hire a listing agent to sell it and try to get as much proceeds as they can for the eventual beneficiaries of this, which could involve aunts and uncles and other brothers. You might have a step brother you didn't know about, or from a prior marriage or stuff like that. So it can get complicated with that. So, the advice there is make sure that your property's in a trust. Yep. And if you're a realtor, make sure your client's property is in a trust. Or if it's a good way to have a touch point with potential clients is, hey, your property's not in a trust. Let me introduce you to a trust attorney. So for a couple $1,000, you can protect your home and what happens to it afterwards and prevent a bunch of infighting with your family.
Yeah, it's fantastic advice. It's that, I feel like a lot of people know it, but taking action on that is kind of a separate thing. But yeah, I mean, it's a California legal process, and I'm sure other states have similar legal processes. When someone passes away and their property needs to change hands, it has to go through probate, which is a lengthy and expensive and paperwork heavy process that most people really don't even know where to start. And especially in your time of grieving and you're dealing with the death of someone close to you, it's the last thing you want to be dealing with. So having that trust can save lots of money, tens of thousands of dollars at the very least, plus just all the headaches and hassle of going through that whole process. And layered on top of that, when you have multiple heirs to a property, and in that case it's 15, I mean, that's just, there's so many different competing opinions and voices, and things can get very messy even within family. So
correct. There's a lot of he said, she said. Grandma said she would leave me the property. Well, Grandpa said he would leave me the property, and you get people fighting about that kind of stuff. I have an interesting case that I worked on. It must have been earlier this year. My landscaper gave me a lead for a property of this woman that wanted to sell her house. And it was a 3-unit in Hillcrest in San Diego. And in this case, she became distressed because she had one of her 3 units. She lived in one and she rented out the other 2. One of her 3 units, they stopped paying rent. And eventually when she got the person out, found out she was a hoarder. And the place was a nightmare. It was disgusting, totally gross, organic stuff growing, mold, mildew, et cetera, and she just barred it, and it was like, I don't ever want to go in there. Can you just please give me a cash offering for your property, and just get this gone. I want it gone. And so she lived in the top floor and had these 2 rentals in the bottom floor. She's like, I just want a condo, make it real easy. And so in that case, I couldn't offer her a fair enough value that would have made me feel good about it, because it was a landlocked property. There was no driveway. There was no garage. There was no way to expand onto it. And so I had to be conservative on my after repair value. So I said, I can only offer this much. If this isn't in line what you want, let's do some work. I'll help you fix this unit up and clean it up and list it and sell it. And so we did exactly that. I got the unit cleaned up for probably $10,000 or $15,000. Fixed a retaining wall that was broken in her house. Did some other minor repairs. The steps up to her unit were broken. She would skip steps to avoid falling through the decking that was there. Wow. So we got all this stuff fixed up, listed it for sale, and sold it for a couple $100,000 more than she would have ever dreamed of. Wow. And actually quite a bit more than I expected it would sell for too, because it was a hot market. But anyway, so helped her transition out of that, got her a new condo in her dream building. And I was talking to her and I said, hey, Linda, you need to put your property into a trust, because I know you own this and a few other properties too. Because she was 80 some years old and she worked as an appraiser, and her and her husband, before he passed, had bought several properties. And she's like, well, what do I need a trust for? I was like, well, so it can go to your family, and there's no fighting or issues or legal fees or having to get the courts involved and stuff like that. She's like, well, I don't have any family. And I said, you don't have any family? She's like, well, no one that knows my name, which was interesting. So this is the story of the little old lady that owns millions of dollars in real estate and has no one to give it to. I was like, well, you don't want the state to get your asset value, do you? She's like, well, absolutely not. I was like, well, you can give it to someone else if you wanted to. Anyone else, friends or family, anyone important to you? She's like, well, could I give it to the museum? And I was like, you could. I guess that's how museum wings get named,
Yeah.
So we're going to have the Linda wing of the San Diego Museum of whatever. And so I still have to get her to put it into a charitable remainder trust or some kind of trust so that her assets go to where she wants and not padding the state's coffers.
Yeah, no, that's great. At least she knows it's going to go somewhere that she feels good about. And,
correct. And she supports the arts. And
right.
Let her support the arts that way. And she doesn't need the money after she's dead. So I've also offered to let her adopt my family. And so we'll see how that goes.
Fair trade. So let's talk about absentee owners. First off, what is an absentee owner?
Yeah, it's typically an owner that maybe bought a property and doesn't live in the area, or it became a rental property for them, and now they're not there anymore, right? I mean, that's basically it. Is there a different definition that you have?
No, yeah, it's basically an out-of-state owner or just someone who doesn't live at the property, typically a landlord, or just someone who doesn't reside in the property.
Right, or someone that could have inherited the property and they're not in the area,
right,
and they don't know what to do with it. And so I had a case like that. I was an absentee owner. The property was up for foreclosure. There was a tenant or a non-owner living there. Come to find out, he states that he was the boyfriend of the person that passed away, the woman that passed away in the house. There's an older couple, so she was probably 70 or 80 when he passed away, and the guy that was there was 70 or 80 years old, and said, hey, that was my girlfriend. That's why I'm living here. You need to pay me to get out of here. And so I said, okay, well, we got to find out who's responsible for the property, right? And so I did some skip tracing, found all of her known associates and relatives and called everyone I knew. And finally got a call back from some lady saying, hey, my family from all over the states, the U.S., is calling me saying you're calling and bugging them. What are you doing, And I told her, I was like, hey, it looks like your family might own some property here in San Diego, and you could probably get some cash out of it. Would you be interested in that? We've already looked into it. There's no money in it. I was like, well, that's not the case. Even if there's no money in it, I could probably still get you at least $5,000. Would it be worth half an hour to an hour of your time to learn more? Right. And that was the hook. She was in. Hook, line, and sinker. I got her in. She met. She's like, okay, get it. You know what you're doing. let's try it. It's worth signing some paperwork to see what happens.
Nice.
And sure enough, I got her the $5,000. The buyer that ended up moving in, it was a short sale. This was a few years ago. It was a short sale. It was in rough shape, broken foundation, broken retaining wall, drainage issues, all the problems. The guy that ended up buying it moved in with the boyfriend of the dead seller.
What?
I don't know how that got resolved, but the other guy would have moved out. He's like, that's fine, I'm moving in, because it was like a 3 or 4 bedroom house. He just moved straight in.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what happened after that, but that was how that went down. It was wild.
You hear about inheriting tenants, but inheriting a roommate is something
inheriting
else.
the ex-boyfriend of the widow, you know. So that was kind of an absentee owner where I was able to get her money, and she was just going to let it go because she didn't know. You know, they had no loss. She wasn't going to have her credit or anything damaged, but $5,000 is $5,000 is worth an hour of your time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you find absentee owners? You know, how do you generate a list of, absentee owner leads? Like, how would you go about doing that?
I wish I was a paid spokesperson for Property Radar, but you can do it on there where it'll show you where the owner's registered address is. And if it doesn't match the property that you're looking at, you automatically know it's an absentee owner, right? So there's easy ways to search in these systems. Show me properties where the owner doesn't live at the residence, and you'll get all rental properties basically too, right? So it could be, they're absentee owners, but it could just be their rental property. So there's a little bit of balance to that. So that doesn't necessarily mean they need to sell, but it does, give you a target of someone that's not at least emotionally tied to a property. That if they're past their depreciation, or if there's deferred maintenance, or you get lucky and it is time for them to sell because it's a hot market, you might be able to get them to sell that piece of property and 1031 exchange it, or do whatever they need to improve their financial situation by selling an asset that may not be performing as well for them as it could be. Right? A lot of times these people might not have changed the rent on a property for many years, so it's not cash flowing as well as it could be. And they're like, well, I'm only making X $100 a month from this thing, so maybe I could sell it and get $200,000 or $300,000 in equity, right? And so that might make more sense than a small amount of cash flow.
Right. So I think a lot of these software, Property Radar, we'll leave a link in the description for anybody who wants to check Property Radar out. They'll look at the mailing address typically for the taxes, and if it doesn't match the subject property, then they might just deem that as an absentee owner. Correct. Because that's not their primary residence.
Correct.
But then I think the key here is layering that on top of other types of distress where, hey, maybe there's high equity, or there's a pre-foreclosure, or there's something else on top of that might indicate that, this seller's more likely to sell than just the millions of absentee owners who just don't live there.
True.
So
absolutely. And some like Property Radar, for example, is coming into my office to go over some of the advanced features that they offer to my real estate team, so we can kind of learn how to target them. They have marketing as well, where you can do targeted marketing through their system on a pay-per-use type feature. And target properties like that, right? Absentee owners, or maybe they have multiple liens, or maybe they had past NODs. Maybe they got tax liens or judgments that you can find on there. Or maybe they've owned it for over 20, 25 years, so they've expired their 27 and a half years of depreciation. So you're exactly right. You can layer all those things and find people that have a higher chance or higher propensity of selling because they've got these different factors and characteristics on that property.
Is there a type of list of sellers that you particularly have found more success with, if you want to share that, or maybe you want to keep it close to the chest?
I share my secret sauce, and it's basically the pre-foreclosure sellers. Yeah. The NOD and NTS, the closer they are to sale, the better, but within reason. So anytime they're late on it, and I have a pretty good track record of doing this so much that I have a good job of earning their trust and rapport to work with me. So something's going to happen. Either I'm going to buy it, or I'm going to list it for sale, or I'm able to help them save their house. Twice in the last few weeks, we're able to help people get modifications or figure out a forbearance program or a reinstatement that worked for them, and are able to save the house, hopefully indefinitely, but maybe at least 3, 6, 9, 12 more months until maybe they're okay with selling at a better time for them, right? And so I like that because typically, even if I don't get to earn a fee or a profit from flipping or selling that property, I've earned that person's trust, and they're referring me their friends and family that can't afford houses. And eventually when they do need to sell, they're going to call me back too, because they know that I'm the guy that helped them at no cost.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're giving tons of value up front, no expectation. And so, everybody is involved in real estate one way or another. Everybody knows someone who owns property, who needs real estate services. So
for sure.
Yeah, it's a great way to give back. And
I wouldn't say no expectations. I set that expectation real quick because they'll always ask me, hey, why would you do this for free? You're spending a lot of time. The hope is that you'd give me some business eventually.
Yeah.
Right. So I do have an expectation. Hey, hopefully I'm doing a good job for you and you can see that I'm proficient at this business.
Yeah.
And you would share my information with people that you know so I could help them as well.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for watching. If you want to learn more about how to start and scale a real estate investing business, just go to realestateskills.com to learn more.